Welcome back to Mr. Excalibur. My name is Arthur, and today we are looking at this sword right here, which is the Ronin Katana two-handed medieval war sword, or just their European model number 3. Now, I am going to start off this review with a very peculiar statement of a bias. And this is really going to throw some of you guys for a loop. I hate this sword. I absolutely do not like this wide cutter style. And that is purely from an aesthetic point of view. I want to get that out of the way right now. My dislike for this is purely based on style, based on personal, I guess you could say, aesthetic preference. I don't know what else, how else you want to refer to that, but that is generally how I feel about it. So just get that out of the way so we understand this. However, I did want to get one of these and give it a fair shake. Now, something that you ought to know, if you don't know by now, this is very representative of what we're seeing a lot of in the European sword community, meaning these very wide-bladed cutters. And the people who are really propagating this, sorry guys, are a group of people that I've kind of nicknamed the HEMA competition cutting crowd, or the HEMA CCC. These guys have really kind of, in my opinion, influenced the sword, the European sword market. And if you need any evidence of that, all you need to do is take a look at some of the big companies out there making European swords. Namely, Ronin Katana. They have 2 of these. They have this one, and then they have the 3.2, which is the one that has the Arabic lettering here right on the ricasso. This is roughly modeled off what's often referred to as the Alexandria sword. There's another one, I forget the name of it. I'll put it in the marks, or I'll research it and put it in the later part of the video, but there's another one that goes by another name that is virtually identical, where you have these very thin, these spindly thin quillions, and then this exceptionally wide cutting blade with a strong central ridge right down the center. Like I said, Ronin Katana has one, Dark Sword Armory has one. As far as I know, I think Arms and Armor have one. I know Albion has several with just different handle furniture that they've put on. I mean, for crying out loud, even Cold Steel came out with what they call their competition cutter, and it is essentially a wide-bladed competition sword, and it's designed this way. And to me, they are over-engineered weapons. This, in battle, these quillions would have been virtually useless. And to have such a wide blade in proportion to such a thin tang, and I'm not saying that the tang is overly thin for any sword, especially this particular make from Ronin Katana. What I'm saying simply is that in proportion to this portion here, had to be off so much that this every once in a while would snap. I mean, it just looks like a design oops. It was kind of called, let's just see if we can make a sword like this and go for it. And to me, I just don't like them. But at the same time, after cutting with it, I can see why people like them. I went through some pretty tough water bottles, and this thing did a pretty good job of cutting through them. I will say that there are some typical criticisms, and I mean typical, but I mean some pretty consistent criticisms of this model that say it's entirely too blade heavy or tip heavy, and I can attest to that. In cutting with this and then trying to recover to get ready for another cut, it really felt that the blade was kind of getting thrown out there, and you're having to really kind of get it back in order to get it ready for another cut. Now, here's the interesting thing though. This sword is not heavy. The overall weight from just, lugging around like this and feeling how heavy it is, it's not a heavy sword. This is not a heavy sword. However, when you do this, you feel all the weight clear out here. Reportedly, the point of balance is like 6 or 9 inches. Well, let's just see. Okay. Almost there. Doing this live for you, so let's just see. That is well over 6 inches away from the hilt, which means you're way down here when it comes to where all that momentum is. So I think don't worry, I am going to wipe that off. One of the things, the common criticisms of this particular model is that there's not enough weight on the back end. I mean, it's one thing to have a hefty sword. I've had hefty swords before, but this is overly so. So it's not a very well designed version of this particular popular design. I will say though, as typical, it's solid. Things got a nice flex to it. The handle, I actually don't mind this so much. I know I used to, the kind of heavily ribbed handle on RK models. I actually don't mind them. Actually, as time has gone on, I've kind of grown accustomed to them. I don't mind them so much. They're actually kind of nice. The other thing is, things got a wicked sharp edge. And that's something that Ronin Katana, when it comes to their swords, tend to stay pretty consistent with. Nice build, clean grind. I mean, it's a satin finish on the blade, and very well put together. I mean, the thing is solid and it's sharp. You got a nice scabbard here. Now you'll notice that I've got the belt assembly still tied to it, and I will be perfectly frank, this is one that I will not be keeping. This is one that I fully intend on selling. But my overall assessment of the sword is that it is a bit tip heavy, but I mean, for how much you're paying, which is, upper 300s, lower 400s for this sword, it's still a good deal. Ronin Katana, doesn't disappoint. One of the things that I would possibly suggest to Ronin Katana is that possibly making the pommel out of a heavier material, maybe a mild steel instead of the stainless steel, which tends to be a lot lighter. Some people criticize Ronin Katana's European swords for having stainless steel furniture. I don't find that necessarily a bad thing. There's been testing done on these swords by other reviewers that shows that their quillions don't snap. They bend, which is what they're supposed to. They're not supposed to snap off. They bend. They distort. They don't break right away, and that's going to actually make sure it protects your hand. Pommels, on the other hand, which although their primary purpose is not as a counterbalance, it doesn't hurt when they do that. So it's something that you may want to consider. Maybe keep the stainless steel, but just make it ever so slightly larger, so it's just got a little bit more weight on the back end, or maybe extend the handle back and increase the size of the pommel. So overall, for what it is, it's not bad for the price, and I'm not sure really if you can do better at this price range. So as far as whether or not it's worth your money, I'd say yes, but with some provisions. Yes, it is, because it's going to be a good, solid sword that is sharp. It's got a nice scabbard. If you're left-handed, the belt assembly, just take it off and get a, something else that's left-handed. That's not a big deal for me. It actually came rather loose in the scabbard, but still nice fitting. So, I mean, overall, a good buy. Definitely not my cup of tea, but as far as the design overall, yeah, it's worth your money, and it's a good deal. So that's kind of my assessment. Enjoy some of the other video portions we've got later on. Of course, we got the unboxing to see how it came to me. A little note on that, as you guys will see, I actually got this a while ago along with another Ronin Katana sword, and it came to me with two things defective. The hilt was loose, the tip was bent. I sent it back. I emailed Ronin Katana right away, and they said, send it back, we'll pay for postage, and we'll get you a new sword as soon as possible. This is what they got. Both problems were fixed, and it was just that easy. So I was interested in the model, so I was willing to take a replacement, and that's what we got. So that's coming up. Also, a couple of people who did review this sword, or at least the 3.2, which essentially is the same sword, from some people, and kind of what they had to say, and what I summarized what they had to say, and then my own cutting with it, and of course the stats. So enjoy the video, enjoy the music, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye for now. The unboxing of this sword, this is Ronin Katana's two-handed medieval war sword, or their European Model 3, is going to be a little bit different because what you're seeing right here was the original unboxing, where this one came with another Ronin Katana model that I had bought previously, and so they sent two of them in the same large box. And so here I am actually pulling out the one we're looking at right now, kind of putting it off to the side, and then looking at it by itself. And one of the first things that I noticed about the sword was, first of all, how it was packed. You can see it's kind of sparsely in there. You just have those few styrofoam blocks kind of keeping it from rattling around inside the box. And but this is typical of Ronin Katana's packing. I mean, most of the time whenever I've ordered their products, there has been no issue at all. However, this time there was. One of the interesting things was, I didn't get it on film here, but as you guys are seeing here, the hilt was loose and the tip was bent, as I mentioned in the intro. And so this was the first one that I got, again with another model that I had ordered along with it. I got them both at the same time. So what I did, this is kind of take two. I sent it back. They paid for shipping. They paid for me to be able to ship it back. And it took a little while because, as it turns out, they were, the ones that they got didn't have the leather applied to the handles, and so they had to look up all the specs on the kind of leather and the leather dye and all that kind of stuff in order to put the leather on the handles once they're here in the United States. Ronin Katana is actually based out of Texas, or at least their distribution is primarily out of Texas. And so I asked them, I said, is this stuff typically, are there any other components that are made here in the United States? And they said typically everything is, assembled and made in the factory in China. However, this was a bit of a burp in the production. Now, if you notice in the box over there, you notice how the quillions had kind of punched a hole in the side of the box. This is one of the reasons why when I got this thing was double boxed. So I think it's called Ronin Katana is aware that this particular design has a propensity for that. could it be maybe in the future, maybe take some styrofoam blocks and kind of just shove them on the side of those quillions, maybe to keep that from happening. When I got this one out, same as the first one, by the way, the scabbard fit, didn't rattle a whole lot. It did a little bit. And my first impressions when holding the sword is exactly what you guys are going to see in a lot of other reviews when we look at some of the clips from previous reviews that have been done on it. It's a nicely built sword. As you guys can see here, it's going to cut the paper just like a dream. It shaves it really nice. I know a lot of people don't really think much of that paper cutting test, but you know what? It's kind of a nice intro, at least, to see how sharp the sword is. Kind of gives you a bit of a preview as to what you can expect when you go out and cutting it. But anyway, as I was saying, as with all Ronin Katana swords, it's very well built, comes sharp, has a nice scabbard, as I mentioned in the summary. This one stuck in the end a little bit, so it had a little bit of stick into the scabbard, but overall it was, it rattled a little bit, but overall it was okay. So my first impressions of the sword were pretty much as I expected. Because I'm already not really a big fan of the design, but that's just a subjective opinion on my part. But also the fact that it's a Ronin Katana. And I'd seen all the reviews already leading up to this, and so it did, I will admit, kind of influence what I thought I would expect when I got it out of the scabbard and was holding it, and it didn't sway from that initial assessment. One of the nice things about their swords is the nice satin finish. It's usually very nicely done, although sometimes you see some nicks or gouges or a few little machine marks. But again, for the price, it's not that bad. So pretty much I should say as expected coming out of the box with this Ronin Katana. We're going to look at some other people's reviews of this sword, beginning with Aikidoka and his assessment. Now, primarily this is just cutting footage, and he's a member of a local HEMA club, and so he gets some pretty good swings in with this one. He makes it look very good. He's an excellent cutter, and so. But however, if you look at some of the comments in this review, and actually some comments that he's posted also in, I believe it's Sword Buyer's Guide, he makes some very consistent remarks with what a number of other people have said about the sword. And that is, it's very tip heavy, it could do with a longer handle, bigger pommel. Generally speaking, that seems to be a pretty consistent theme here. Kimosabe does a pretty nice review of the sword. He looks at it primarily from the point of view of a historical piece. He does a little bit more of the historical background of the sword, mentions where he's from and where the sword, how long it took to get to him. He doesn't really have any complaints about the model. And this is something that a lot of these reviewers mention about the sword. And that is, intrinsically, the Ronin Katana way of designing these swords isn't bad. And however, he does point out one interesting tidbit in this, and that is, based on his assessment, he thinks that the pommel that they use is a similar pommel that they use on a lot of their other models, thus kind of keeping the price down. That may be the case, and if Ronin Katana were to upgrade that pommel and redesign the handle, we might see the price of this sword go up. So that might be a contributing factor as to why the price is able to be kept at the level that it is. like most people, he was very pleased with the sword at the price range. Um, Thought it was a reasonable representation of a Type 18C blade. He mentions the type of hilt and pommel and handle that it was. But overall, he liked the sword for what it was, but he had some very similar and consistent reservations. This review was done by a guy named Space Duck. He did primarily cutting footage with the sword here, just cutting some water bottles, mentioning the same history of the sword. Now, this guy actually got the Model 3 version 2 with the actual Arabic writing written on the base of the hilt. And our next review will be the same thing, but the sword in its dimensions, its size, everything else about it are exactly the same as the one we got. So if this, kind of invalidates a comparison between the one that we're focusing on, which is kind of the plain, the initial, the regular Euro Model 3, you can always blast past this, but it has some nice cutting here. Now, you will notice that this guy is a rather robust individual, and he's talking about how he can, handle this sword rather well in one hand. This sword comes in at about 3.5 pounds. So it is a robust sword, and he's a rather robust individual, so he handles it rather well. That's not to invalidate his experience, it's just to put it in the proper context. And of course, we have Matthew Jensen and his evaluation of it. Now, first of all, some qualifying remarks here of Matthew Jensen's review of the sword. Number one, he bought this one used. And I will say that these swords typically come right out of the box pretty sharp. And in the little bit of cutting footage that we included here from his review, we'll notice that it doesn't cut all that well through the timing mat that he has. So we're not really sure in the review how much it had been used. The sword appears to be in pretty good shape. It has the belt assembly, it has everything. He mentions the pommel is not really something that he's comfortable with. He does do a lot of comparison between this sword and Albion's Alexandria sword, as well as, I think it's the Principe. This is something that a lot of people do address when it comes to Ronin Katana's Euro models, their handles. And some people either like this or they don't when it comes to their handles. Some people automatically assume that they're going to be handling the swords with gloves, so it doesn't really matter a whole lot. Some people don't use gloves and they don't like it that much. Some people do. He mentions that it actually doesn't really bother him a whole lot. He looks at the heavy stitching along the one side, and he does kind of wonder when he looks at it whether or not it's going to start coming off. He's reviewed other Euro models before from Ronin Katana, and that has not necessarily been an issue to where the leather wrapping over the cording underneath comes off. He remarks here on a couple places how nicely fit everything is, and this is something really to Ronin Katana's credit on all of their swords, not just this one. This is just a good example of it, and that is how well everything is fit. It's nice to see a sword at this price range where the fit and finish is pretty good for something, again, at this price point. And so again, it lends credence to what a lot of people say, and that is, for what you're paying, it is very good. I mean, Matthew Jensen, I'll just spoil the end here a little bit, and he says, he comes right off the top at the very end of his video by saying, yeah, he thinks it's worth it. He mentions the same issues that a lot of people have had with it, and that is, it's very tip heavy. It's not exactly designed very well compared to some of its higher priced relatives. Um, Matthew Jensen has reviewed the Alexander sword from Dark Horse, no, not Dark Horse, from Dark Sword Armory, as well as some of the Albion versions of it too, and he finds the differences quite stark. But one also has to keep in mind that this sword is probably the least expensive of all those versions, and he still recommends it as a good buy. When looking at what you're getting, the quality of the build, and how nice it is. So that's our summary of what's out there about this sword so far. This is my turn cutting with Ronin Katana's Euro Model 3, their two-handed medieval war sword. As I mentioned several times throughout this video, aesthetically this is just not one I like the look of, but I wanted to give it a try, see what my experience was compared to some of the others that you've seen snippets of already. And it's not very often that I have said this. In fact, I'm not sure I've ever said this, but I think this part of the video for you guys is unfortunately gonna be a little boring, because quite honestly, I don't have that much to add. The previous reviews of this sword have been awfully consistent, and I have to agree with them. And that is, it's well built, sharp, although like we said, Matthew Jensen's opinion was somewhat skewed because he did buy a used model, and it tended to cut really well. Now I will have to admit, cutting with the sword really felt odd, and I had to get kind of my land legs sort of when trying to figure this out. Now, cut the thing's top off all the way. It just went flying. The milk bottles, of course, were, child's play for this sword. Wide blade, nicely sharpened. It cut them very nice, and I got some great static cuts out of those big jugs. But like I was saying, I really don't have a lot to add here, more than what's already been said about this sword as far as how it handles, how well it's made and put together. I suppose what you could say is this is just more evidence for those of you looking to buy this sword, and you're looking this up and saying, okay, well, what does this guy have to say? The answer is pretty much the same as everybody else. I've tried to be fair when it's come to the reviews of some of the other people out there, and I think it's been pretty consistent as far as how people have reviewed it. Some of these water bottles are pretty toughened, so it mostly bashes them, but this is a really nice cut right here. I'm just gonna say right from the top, and bang, took it clean off. I mean, it was a nice clean static cut. Tried to get another cut out of it with this sword, but the smaller juice bottles, they tend to not have enough weight, and they tend to go flying. But I actually did get another cut off the top of it. Here was of course the fillet weighing. See how many rings off this thing I could get, and I actually got quite a few. So I was pretty happy. Some people kind of chastise the milk bottles for not really being a real test of how sharp these things are, but I think it's a combination of how sharp they are, also with how good you are with it. As far as how good shaved off a piece of it. I think I swing and a miss here at some point. That now almost took the box with me.
Now, these swords are made of 1075 hard carbon steel. Ronin Katana has had a lot of success and has gained quite a good reputation with these swords as far as the material that they're using, how tough they get this 1075 material when they mono-temper it. Now, some people often say, especially when the sword reviewers come along, how do you really know that's the steel they are? Well, as a reviewer, we kind of have to say, this is what the company is saying it's made out of, so that's what we have to kind of go on, and based off that, this is how we're noticing the sword is performing. And my experience with Ronin Katana swords, this sword being no different, is that the material is pretty tough, stays sharp, and really holds up to some of the testing. So make sure you oil it so you have it to play with another day.